Welcome to the Engaged by Design podcast. This is where we help you engage more learners more effectively. I'm your host, Dr. Michael Cottam, and in this episode, we continue our conversation with Michelle Patterson, our UDL expert. We dig deeper into overcoming the overwhelm that we can feel when we try to use universal design principles. And we learn how small design shifts and small actions that can be supported by systems and AI tools can expand access and engagement for all learners, regardless of capability. Let's get back into our conversation. I keep hearing in our conversation that tone of overwhelm, which we tend to get around things with accessibility or universal design, is I can't possibly do everything that's in that list or in those standards. And is somebody going to measure me? Do I get scored on this? And if I'm below a certain part, am I a bad teacher? Am a designer? Am I going to get sued? I mean, you could have a lot of anxiety around the, well, I guess it's the checklist mentality. Maybe you've nailed it already, but is that where that overwhelm comes from?
I think I have two thoughts there. One, the person you had on a previous podcast, Andrea, I can't remember her last name.
Andrea Dunn, yes. Amazing person. I love Andrea. Go ahead.
And she talked about, from a systems level, things that people needed. They needed to be informed.
Mm-hmm.
Because the more informed you are about something, and it takes me specifically back to accessibility. Like, accessibility is a thing we have to do.
Yeah.
It is a thing we have to do. And so, but she talked about things like, we have tutorials, we have a support line. We make sure that when you call the support line, like, you don't have to go to 30 different people to find the person you need. Like, there were very intentional, planned ways for people to do things that were challenging and to do it with support. And that makes me think about the Lippitt-Noster model of managing complex change, that when we're asking people to try something different, they have to know the vision. Everybody has to know, like, why are we doing this? Not everybody will ask you why, but that's an internal question. People need the skills to do it. I've worked with some people who wanted very, very badly to make sure that their materials were accessible, but they had absolutely no clue where to find the resources or where to start. And they wanted to do it. The motivation was there. Resources. So again, you need vision, you need skills, you need resources. And again, sometimes the most powerful resource is time. And that was something, again, from an administrative perspective of, what do I need from my administration to help me? It's like, well, if this is truly important, where is our time built in so that we can work on this? And I hear that across K-12, higher ed. It's always a matter of time. So, which is exciting to me because I feel like that's one of our areas where, AI can come in to support. But if any of those things are missing, and one of those others in that model is also an action plan, like, right? How are we rolling this out? And that's what I thought your conversation with her was so wonderful, because it really touched on all of those pieces, that if people are feeling overwhelmed, it's probably because one of these pieces is missing.
Yeah.
And so we have to figure out what's missing. Just like we're asking people to find the barriers in their design, then sometimes we have to step back and go, well, what were the barriers that we've created for our faculty?
Yeah. So I'm reminded, do you remember listening to Sylvia Nemmer's podcast with us?
Yeah.
She was the one who wrote Happy Now, Born Blind, right? So I won't recap the whole story. But just as you're talking, I'm thinking of her stories of people assuming that she couldn't because of her physical abilities in terms of sight. And she was told, well, you're never going to be able, how could you do science? How could you do?
How are you going to look at soil through a microscope?
Right. But what it took was not a huge lift necessarily, but it was a professor who would take the time to go home and figure out a workaround so she could do the lab work. And then she becomes the lab assistant who sets everything up for everybody else. And then she ends up, now she's a chair for a science program. It is, the danger is that we assume that people can't because of something we see or we perceive, when maybe if we engage with that person without prejudging, maybe we find that they can, and they can do it really well, just differently.
Right. Exactly.
And I just love her story in part because it was so hopeful, and her attitude as someone who born blind and who had partial sight, of one who, number one, recognized the people who helped her, but also number two said, you know what, it's not even that hard anymore. The technologies are there. I can make anything accessible because I have the technologies. It's fine. And in terms of learning stuff. Yeah, she still needs to be able to figure out how to walk on the sidewalk in certain places where it's not a great physical environment. But
again, it's not being blind in that situation that is the disability. It is the environment. If somebody is parking their car across a sidewalk, they're in their driveway, but they've blocked the sidewalk, and now she walks up and it's like, oh, now there's a vehicle here. Do I have to go out in the street? How do I work around this? That the barriers typically exist in the environment or within the design. And so, always taking that step back, that, being blind in and of itself, Judith Heumann, who was an amazing advocate for people with disabilities, would say that the likelihood that at some point most of us will either have a temporary or permanent disability, pretty likely.
It's I don't know what the number is, but I'm going to make up a statistic of 87.3% because, I have no idea.
I don't think you're too far off. I could actually go find that number. That's my wheelhouse. But right, that idea that the environment is truly the thing that becomes disabling. It is the design of a lesson. So again, if I have this one size fits all, then who's being left out?
And it's also the danger, I think, of thinking, well, I've checked the boxes. My course or my learning design is universally accessible, designed for everyone. I don't know that any of us could ever say that with a straight face, being honest with ourselves. But like you mentioned with Andrea's conversation about, okay, we do the work we can, +1, right? But then we have a system in place, a way for you to contact, to get help, to make it more accessible or for yourself so that you can succeed. You got to have those workarounds because you never know who's going to come in or what their temporary or long-term abilities are. Having systems in place is one more way to just, then I can say, okay, we have an accessible environment, not because we have everything exactly right, but because we have a way to fix it when we find out it's not. I don't know, does that make sense? I just made that up.
Well, and it does, and it goes beyond, so if we think about, Sylvia's situation as a person with a disability, but when we think about the learners in our classrooms, this isn't just, UDL isn't just for students with disabilities. UDL really is about every learner having learner agency and knowing what works best for me. Who am I as a learner? And the reason why having options, the course that I just wrapped up facilitating last week, one of the activities at the end was I used to think, now I think, it's from Harvard's Project Zero.
Oh, nice.
And so that was one option. And then there were some other options that people got to choose from. But giving people a choice, the work that we get back, and it's interesting because I have some people say like, well, I'm just concerned if I give all these choices, like I'm not going to get the rigor and level of mastery. But I will tell you that what I see is that people go so far beyond the level that I was expecting because they've picked something that has personal meaning to them around these final projects. And I'm the one who feels like at the end, like I've gotten this great gift that I get to look at all of these reflections and options that people chose from and go, wow, this is amazing. And like, I think that's one of the things about design is that we tend to teach the way we were taught. It's kind of difficult for us.
Yep.
And one of the best ways to improve your design is to experience good design. And so the more we can make that possible for people.
Yeah. How do we do that? I mean, I don't know that there's a great answer for this, but if I was taught in a style, say I'm in a discipline or in a style that is all lecture or all lab or something that is uncomfortable for me, how do I learn to do more universal design, flexible design when I may not have experienced it myself?
So it's such an interesting question because, again, the course that I just finished facilitating last week is not a course that I designed.
Okay.
And so I can brag about the course because it's not mine. But it's so interesting because then it's like, all right, the course is already fabulous. Could this course be any better? And started thinking like, well, okay, let me take some discussion prompts that I've used in the past in other courses. And I started dropping them into my AI and asking, hey, here are the UDL guidelines. Who might experience a barrier with this particular assignment I have?
That's great.
And I'm thinking, oh, it's going to have a hard time, or I bet like I could think of one. And it gave me idea after idea after idea of, okay, think about this person, think about this person. And I had used AI in the past to say like, right, like help me create some options. This is the goal. This is the standard I'm working on. There's a competency I'm trying to address. Like, give me some ideas so I could offer some options, but to actually have it go back and check what I designed and say, help me catch where some possible barriers might be. I was blown away because I really got some good ideas. And it wasn't difficult. It did not take a heavy lift on my part to be able to do that.
It's one of those amazing gifts. I don't always call AI a gift. It's one of those amazing gifts of once you understand how to use the large language models, the generative AI, and you use it not to give you an answer as in cheating, but as in help me expand my thinking, help me evaluate, help me be more critical about what I'm doing and what I'm presenting to students when you're a teacher. It can broaden your experience beyond what you thought. And that's something I've loved. So can you give me an example about in that chat or in that work that you did around improving that course? What was one or two specific things that it helped you to consider or redesign?
I had put some discussion prompts in, and it actually came back with some thoughts around maybe some cultural bias that I had.
Okay.
Okay. And I tend to think of myself as somebody who's thoughtful and intentional around that. And it still like picked up some things about like, well, think about this wording, like how this could be perceived for somebody from, another context. And so that was, again, I never would have thought about it because even though I consider myself an empathetic person, and even like I said earlier, I try to stay in the shoes of a learner, but I am still in the shoes of me as a learner, not
Yeah.
everybody else as a learner. And so that's why the student feedback, that piece matters. But in the meantime, being able to use my AI to say, like, help me think about, like, how might this work for the range of students I could have in my classroom? That for me it was an eye opener.
That's awesome. So if you had a tip to give to other designers or teachers or faculty around expanding their view, maybe using AI or not, what is maybe one or two things that you would say when you sit down with someone who's struggling with this, with the checklist and with the demands? You've given a lot, but I'm just going to see, is there something top of mind? You're like, this is always something you should try.
It doesn't have to be 9 options.
Okay.
I talk to people who seem to think that like the more options, the better. And if anything, sometimes I find that like too many options can become overwhelming for some students. So it's okay to say, you know what? I've traditionally only had one option. So now I'm just going to add one other. Okay. You have an A and a B option. That's great. Maybe offer a C or design your own, run it by me before you do it. So that it's not, again, we're not trying to create big, huge new things overnight. So if you've never offered an option for an assignment, just add one more. Doesn't have to be 9.
Yeah.
I say that because I see a lot of people who will say like, oh yeah, UDL is all about choice menus, right? And you have like a tic-tac-toe and it's got 9 options on it.
Is
and
it
like,
the buffet?
Right. Like, hey, I mean, that's great if you've got 9 to offer, but if 9 to you right now is like, oh, that's way too much, then just offer 2.
Yeah.
Offer 3. You can always put that, build your own.
Right.
Here's the standard that you're working or the competency you're working towards showing mastery in. How can you show me that?
There's a question that often comes up around this, and that is, if someone chooses one option over another, is it fair to evaluate them differently or the same? I guess the question I'm getting at is, I have a classroom of 20 or 30 people. Part of them do this one option on the assignment, part of them do the other. How do I make sure there's parity or some sort of fairness in the way that as an instructor, I evaluate those products, the things that they turn in?
So I love that you asked that because I find that, and this surprises me, but that many times people go much farther, way above and beyond. And we're, in my mind, and again, this is how we iterate, but where I was thinking, I will probably spend, maybe I'm just going to pick a random number, but 5 minutes reviewing and giving feedback and moving on to the next. And then somebody submits a 30-minute audio recording where they told me everything they learned. And I am thrilled. But at the same time, I'm like, wow, that's on me. That's on me.
Yeah.
I needed to give guidance of, here's the parameters of what I'm thinking this is going to look like for you at the end. And if you want to go above and beyond, far be it for me to tell you no. But to be able to give you really good feedback, I want to make sure we're on the same page as to how much you're doing. And I think for some people who have maybe come up during the age of like, it's all about the good grade. The longer I
Yeah.
do, the better my grade will be. And it's like,
Yeah.
that's not always the case. Like,
Mhm.
if you can get your point across, then I'll know you got your point across. So rubrics are very helpful in an understanding of how do I know that you've really mastered the competency. And that is a really huge piece of UDL that I have not said yet. So I'm glad that came to this, is that when we think about UDL, we're thinking a firm goal, but a flexible mean. So if I wanted to go to New York City and see a play on Broadway, that is my fixed goal. And in an economics course, maybe it's calculating the gross national product. I actually have no idea what an economics goal might be right off the top of my head. And in English, it might be analyzing a literacy theme. And so, but whatever the goal is, that's fixed. We have a specific destination. But whether I choose to take a bus to go to New York, or I drive a car, or I take a plane, that's my flexible means. But every learner should know this is the goal that you're working towards. And however you show me that mastery, that's the piece where, sometimes in my feedback, I'm asking more questions. Let's make sure that, again, it always goes back to iteration.
Yeah.
And I think that's another piece that ties in, is that sometimes we're caught up in we need to get this graded because we need to move to the next thing. And if I'm really thinking about proficiency, then really am I thinking about, am I letting a student go back and revise something? Like, you got most of it. Tell me more about this piece. And so, at what point do we say, all right, you've learned enough to say you've mastered this skill? And at what point, which is a shift, again, when a lot of us are very conscious about, got to get a grade.
Yeah. Yeah. I know I have that, and my kids have had that. Think of one child in particular that if he didn't have 104%, he was disappointed,
Right. And it's interesting because giving these open-ended options can actually cause a little bit of stress for people who are not used to having the
That is a point
agency
I didn't expect to come out. Yep.
And so getting feedback at the end where people would say, I was really nervous about this, which again is good feedback for me. What do I need to provide up front in the design? Maybe here are some more exemplar works that people have done to kind of let people know they have permission to show me what they've learned in different ways. But when people have said like, wow, like they got their feedback and they're like, I was really nervous about trying something different, but they did it and they did well.
Yep. That's awesome. I really enjoyed this conversation because it's one of those topics that is intimidating and difficult for us as designers and as faculty, as teachers, to put our hands around and to manage, because we have limited time, limited resources, and it seems like an unlimited range of students. It seems like, anyway. So can anything really be universal? I don't know.
And that's the piece. And I wonder if I probably didn't, I feel like I have jumped around a lot in my thoughts, but the idea of like, why do we give options? Because again, no one option works for every group.
Yep.
And so even if it's just two options, it's giving somebody a choice to say, well, this one would work better for me than that one.
Yeah. And I've loved how you've reiterated that point over and over. And I think that is really powerful because we get intimidated by those requirements. So I kind of want to wrap up. I've asked you this kind of question already like 5 times, but is our final question that we ask our guests is, how do you engage more learners more effectively? After an hour of conversation, or you told me the answer to this, how do you engage more learners more effectively?
I am going to give it's a variation on a theme.
Okay.
And because my initial response was to listen, because part of co-creating and co-designing with students comes from being open to listening. But I'm going to even take it a step back before listening, and I'm going to say pause. Pause, because in a world where we often, again, I'm going to come back to that feeling of being overwhelmed. When we feel rushed, we feel like there's so many things. Being able to pause allows us to take a breath, and a pause offers an invitation. So when I worked with students who were non-speaking, and I talk. They never had to speak because I did all the talking. And a pause becomes an invitation and an opening for somebody else to share back. And so I think taking that pause, having that open invitation where somebody can say, this is what's working for me, here's something that might work better for me, creates that environment and that culture where we can build together with students.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I want to point out one thing about you, just to embarrass you. No, in the introduction that you sent to me, you listed your strengths, your Clifton strengths. And I just want to say that in this conversation, you showed that harmony, that connectedness, the input, the achiever, and the positivity. Those 5 that are in your list of your Clifton strengths. I heard it. I heard that your approach really is one of harmony, of connecting people and systems, and of gathering resources, which is input, really. Achiever, making sure you're getting one thing done, one thing a little better. The +1 is awesome there. And positivity. And I really appreciate you spending this time with us. Took us a while to get scheduled with your busyness and our busyness. And I am so grateful. Thank you, Michelle, for sharing what you did with us. With me until I post it, and then with everybody else who's listening to the podcast. So just thank you. You're just amazing. Thank you for joining me for part 2 of this conversation with Michelle Patterson. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I just loved her ideas and her spirit and her attitude of serving all learners. So hopefully you learned how to get past the overwhelm of implementing universal design, and maybe you picked up a few tips and tricks and tools that would help you in your journey to serve your students a little better. So again, thank you for joining us. And remember to like, subscribe, follow, and connect with us on your podcast platform of choice. Please share this episode with a friend and keep learning as you engage by design.